I mean, you're asking me what my opinion is. So I'm going to say I think you're approaching it wrong.
Okay.
So I think the real answer to this is not... So it's not going to work, basically. Your hypothetical is flawed.
Okay.
Because you're injecting your judgment into the hypothetical.
Okay. How have I been? Good. I think it's like a busy stress, like lots of stress, but there's lots of stuff going on. There's lots of activity. It's a lot of stuff. It's always a lot of stuff. Yeah.
That's cool. What kind of stuff are you doing?
Well, there was an interesting, weird legal situation with my wife where because of how complicated the international taxes are, Sweden thought that they were cooking her books, which is ridiculous. But I came here to Sweden to be with her for her court thing. Seems like it went really well. She finally got her passport back, so that's good. I have a thing going on with my parents where I kind of like made a deal with them that because my mom has Alzheimer's disease and it's starting to advance more noticeably, I made a deal with my dad that as long as they close all of their credit cards and they get rid of all their credit and they freeze their accounts, I'll pay all their debt off so that my dad can retire early. And then that's been a thing I've been kind of working on in the background. Obviously, as my platform has gotten larger and I've like expanded to more people, I'm trying to like manage like my streaming, my traveling and being on other podcasts, my responsibilities being like a political guy and like finding like what my bearing should be on all of that, especially about Redpill shit. I've had this huge thing recently about the medication stuff that I reached out to you. There's a million things. There's always a million things. I've hired a lot of new employees. I've got a podcast that I hope I'm finally starting. Just like a million things. Yeah.
Wow. So I am hearing a million things. So like personal stuff on several fronts, professional development stuff, but also like it sounds like you're not doing. I'm getting the sense that you're juggling different kinds of balls than you used to.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, like, more personal stuff now. I think maybe. Yeah.
Well, even I mean, when I think about, let's say 3 years ago and the kind of work that you did, you were mostly streaming, and now it sounds like you're doing a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, while still trying to do mostly streaming. Yeah, yeah. Like my audience makes fun of me for never streaming anymore, but like last month I streamed 170 hours, and that counts as no streaming for them. So, but like,
wow.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a lot of stuff. Yeah.
170 hours. That's a lot, man.
Yeah, I try, yeah. But they're used to me way back in the day. I would stream like 300 hours, and then they're probably more used to like 200 to 250, and then 170 or 160 from there seems like nothing. So yeah.
That's crazy, man.
Yeah, I think
so. And you mentioned something about you had some questions about like stimulant medication or something.
Yeah, basically, or maybe even more broadly, like mind, or maybe any type of, I guess, like enhancement medication, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, talk to me about it. You want to hop in, or you want to talk about other stuff?
Well, tell me how you're doing real quick. I'm curious because I see you popping up. I don't know if you've noticed this. I think I reached out to you. We have missed each other like 2 or 3 times in incredibly random places. I did a show with Charlie, the guy from Charisma on Command.
Yeah.
I think I was in his house like 4 hours after you left, and I had like no idea.
I remember. Yeah, I remember that coincidence. Yeah, I do think we're like popping up in similar places. Mm-hmm. I think I may be. I'm going out to SF, LA, and Las Vegas probably in a couple of weeks to do things that I'm sure you have done or will be doing or somehow affiliated with. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we do keep on. We're like ships passing in the night. But the cool thing is that we can connect about stuff.
Yeah. So your stuff is going good. Are you happy with how, I guess, where you guys are with all of your online stuff, with the expansion of your platform and talking to other people, or how's that been? How do you feel like that's been going?
Yeah, so I think it's been going well, but also it's like very confusing because I'm not quite sure what direction to go because we've got a lot of different options. And just trying to figure out like what do people need and what's the best way to deliver it. So we recently started a channel for parents. And so like that's something that is a very different demographic, but I was kind of thinking about it like, okay, like where do most of the problems in our community originate from? I think it originates from upbringing. So if you want to have the largest impact on mental health, I think helping people's upbringing and their sort of formative years as humans is probably like the biggest thing that you can do. And I think a lot of the problems that we see today are because the world that parents are growing up in is different, and the parenting skills that they have are no longer sufficient for like the digital age. So we're trying to do something there. We'll see how that goes. But that's not the place that we get the most traction.
Yeah. That's just what you said there. That's so interesting, because I grew up as probably more online than most, but I kind of had a foot in both worlds just because of my age, right? I'm 34. Cell phones didn't really exist until like 2007 with the iPhone. Everything before then was like questionable. And even I have like a really big difficulty with my son, like trying to set like what's an appropriate boundary, how should he communicate with people online. It's really hard when children are communicating online, because as an adult, if somebody messages me, like I know how to verify people's identities. Do you have social media? Where do you post or whatever? But when Nathan is communicating with, a 12-year-old, boy or girl, verifying all of that or making sure you know who's who is way more difficult. And I would expect that me being like the permanently online streamer, like I'll be able to do this no problem, but it's really challenging out there. And I am not envious of the parents that have, almost no tech background, trying to sort through, their child being in these new crazy online environments that are so unprecedented. They have no, experience with. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So I think that it's getting harder, because technology, I think, is becoming more invasive. I think as platforms compete against each other for our attention spans, the one person that definitely ends up losing our attention is ourselves, right? So if like TikTok and YouTube and Twitch, if everyone's competing for us, Instagram, and as they get better at competing against each other, like the one person who loses time is us. And so I think that there's just a lot of work there to be done, and we'll see kind of how that goes.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, well,
yeah,
stimulants.
So let's talk about So what's going on, man?
So I'll do from a personal perspective first. And actually, maybe even you can help me sort this like personal thing. I'm curious how you decide this. I have a really hard time in my life sorting out what is like an appropriate like where do you draw lines on a spectrum for some things? So for instance, maybe for a relationship, right? Like the best partner would be a partner that had all the same hobbies, similar communication styles, similar age, like all these things. But in the real world, we kind of have to like make some compromises. You're not gonna have like the most 100% perfect person. Or when it comes to like I think for my free time, sometimes I look at the time that I have and I'm thinking like I always feel like I could be doing so much more. Like I'll wake up and maybe I'm in bed on my phone for 30 minutes. Maybe it's usually like Reddit, or thank God I don't have TikTok. Maybe it's like sitting in my chair and like reading chat instead of like going to the gym immediately. Like I look at all of these little points in the day where I'm losing time. And I know as like an online person, there's a million other things you can do. What do you think is like, at what point do you draw an appropriate boundary where you're like, you should be pushing yourself 100% or 50% or 80%? Do you have any, like, how would you even go about figuring that out, I guess? Yeah, go ahead. I'm curious.
Yeah. So I would, so personally, not personally, but personally and professionally, I think that the premise is flawed. So when you kind of said that there's like this perfect partner who has A, B, C, D, like that's how you find the perfect relationship. I don't think that's actually what constitutes a perfect relationship. Okay. So a perfect relationship isn't about finding 100%. It's about the interactions that you have. You don't need the same communication style. You need investment and reciprocity is usually, or some degree of balance, sure, right? Which you could say that's what's on the 100%. But I think in order to answer this question, okay, I could be doing so much more, right? Like that's your question. Like, how do you decide how much to push yourself and how much to kind of, and I would start with like, why do you need to do more?
From a socially responsible point of view, I feel like I make a ton of money now and have a ton of influence. And the only reason why I've gotten to where I'm at is because people that had the means to do so invested a lot in society prior to me, whether you're talking about scientific researchers, whether you're talking about really inspirational teachers, whether you're talking about revolutionary fighters, George Washington, whoever, like all of these figures have invested into kind of like mankind because of the unique gifts and talents and opportunities they've had. And I feel like I kind of owe it to pay it forward. So on a societal level, I feel like that obligation exists with everybody to some extent. And then from a personal development level, I just see that like let's say that I spend like an hour on Reddit every day, right? I think I could very easily cut out 30 minutes and like practice guitar. And if I look at where I'm at 1 year, like retrospectively, my life is a million times better. I know that it's like a way better, like I could probably uninstall Reddit from my phone and my life would probably be better for it. You know, even if my day-to-day instant dopamine hits aren't there, the fulfillment I'll feel at the end of the year is just going to be better. And I have a hard time not like reductively applying that same thought process to every single area of my life. Like I remember there was 1 week where, well, it was just now, we'll get into the medication they want to say, these stimulants, where I would wake up at like 9 a.m. and like my goal was to be like on the treadmill in the gym at 9:05. Okay, I wanted to wake up, like throw my pants and everything on, grab my phone so that I could check my emails, but I'm only doing that like on the treadmill. And when I started to live days like this, I'm like, holy shit, like I'll have like gym and like 2 errands done by like 11:30 a.m. And I'm like, this is way better. But then obviously, yeah, I mean, you can't burn yourself into the ground. So I don't know, like what is like the appropriate way to draw lines there or something. That's how I view it, I guess. Sorry, that was a longer answer, but yeah.
Yeah. So no, I mean, I think the appropriate way to draw lines has to do with what's important to you, right? So I think, like, once again, I mean, I'm all for being more efficient, but and you talk about these like big people, right, who have made big contributions, and I mean, how much do you owe the world?
As much as you can give, I would say, I would think so, but
Why?
I feel like the way that like humanity kind of works, the way that people work is there is something about us that's greater than the sum of our parts. Like if you were to use a really crude calculation of like how much happiness can one person produce, maybe it's like 10 units. But if you take two people and you put them together they might be able to make 300 units. That society, civilization, our institutions, all of this collective work kind of like builds on itself to create something that's so much more than the sum of its parts. And in order for that to work going forward, I think it kind of requires people to like rise to a calling or pursue certain gifts that they have in certain ways to, I guess, like better society or the people around them, at least, I would say.
Okay. How do you feel when you do 2 errands and you go to the gym by 11:30?
You're really good, obviously, yeah.
Really good in what way? What part of you feels good?
What part of me? My brain? I mean, I feel very productive. Like I've done something that I know is good for me. I've done something that I know I had to do like work-wise. I've still got a lot of time in the day. I feel like I'm very effectively allocating my time, and that feels really good. Like ineffectively allocating my time feels really bad. Like so bad that it can ruin days. Yeah, go ahead.
What feels bad about it?
Man, I don't know. Like I'm sure people can vibe with this. If you wake up at 9 and you're on your phone in bed until like 11 and then you get out of bed, it feels like you've wasted, like there's 2 hours of my day that I could have done bettering myself, the people around me, financially. There's like a million better things I could have done with my time, but I did nothing. And now that time is just wasted. And it feels, if I say inefficient, it sounds robotic, but it just feels like there's so many other better things, I could do with my time. I would just be like a better person for it.
How do you feel about yourself for wasting time?
Yeah, bad, stupid, like dumb. Like I know I'm smart enough to know that there's a stupid use of my time is sitting here like on my phone like an idiot. Yeah, that sounds mean. I don't mean it, but like I do feel that way. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about that?
Disappointing, I guess. That I know I can do better.
So okay. Here's you wasting time. Okay. Here's you reacting to you wasting time. So this person is disappointed.
Yeah.
What do you think about this dyad, this interaction between you and yourself?
Like the distance from my cognition to my metacognition, or is that like the separation?
Yeah, like what do you think about the relationship between your cognition and your metacognition? Because there's a relationship there, right?
I mean, sometimes the tether is very short and sometimes it's very, very far away. This has been something that I've been struggling with that kind of leads us into the I guess like the ADHD and the medication talk. So I've tried stimulants now for about 2 weeks after getting a diagnosis. And I feel like these two things have like become one, basically, to where...
What does that mean?
As in, like, before, I might wake up and it's like, I should get out of bed and we'll kind of check Reddit and I see what's going on. It's already 30 minutes, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's kind of like how it's going. I know I should probably get out of bed. Whereas now, like, if I'm throughout the day, if I need to do something, it's like, I need to do this. And then I go and I do that because I know I need to do it. And it's like obvious, like, I need to do this. Let's go do it. Rather than like sitting down, checking my computer, doing a bunch of other random stuff. Like, I can think I need to do something and then go do something. So I feel like those two things have shrunk significantly. But
okay. So it seems like you are further able to meet your goals since you've started stimulant medication.
Yeah.
And okay, so let's just offer just a couple of quick ground rules, boundary setting.
Sure.
So I'm not going to dispense medical advice, and let's just be clear on what that is. So I think it's completely fine to have a conversation, like an existential or philosophical conversation about performance enhancement, stimulants, what do we want to do in life, etc. What usually medical advice around stimulants looks like involves a thorough diagnostic process, right? So I'll ask you 1,000 questions that I'm not going to ask you today. And then as well as like discussing different treatment options, the process of informed consent. These are the things that constitute the practice of medicine and developing a treatment plan. So I'm happy to share. I've had these conversations with mentees of mine because people are wondering, right? Like, this is a very common conversation to have. So I think it's totally fine. But just so we're on the same page, I'm not going to be diagnosing you or treating you with anything or saying you should or should not take stimulants, because in order for me to say that, I have to know medically diagnostic information.
Yeah.
Are we clear on that?
Yeah. I'd make a joke, but being very serious, I 100% understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, Destiny, I think... okay, so you feel good about yourself after you have started taking stimulants because you're more productive?
Well, hold on. That was a much larger statement. I feel good when I can do the things that I need to do immediately. Do I feel good about myself in a broader sense? I guess that's kind of like the dilemma, or that was, for a while, that was like the issue. Yeah.
So in what ways do you not feel good about yourself? Right?
So, okay.
So you started stimulant medication so you could get more stuff done. And it seems like, it sounds like you went through a very legitimate process of seeing a medical professional, arriving at a reasonable diagnosis and a reasonable treatment plan that included stimulants. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and why did you do that?
So
what was your motivation?
Yeah, I want to say, like, I think it was 6 years ago, my son had major issues in the classroom, like such that we went through so many different, I think they're called IEPs for classrooms. We had him like crawling through resistance tunnels to burn energy. We wondered if he had ASD. We were trying to figure out like what was going on, and eventually we kind of settled on ADHD, and then we tried to manage that a few ways. And then I had to do a lot of reading about drugs because I won't say toxically masculine, but I grew up very conservative. I've had like 4 ibuprofen in my life. I'm not like a pill guy at all. And the idea of having my he would have been like 7-year-old son like on amphetamines is like, Jesus, or methadone or whatever the other one was called. That was a big deal to me. So I did a whole bunch of reading, a whole bunch of research. And in the course of all of that reading and research, because I kind of wanted to know, I don't want to say I didn't believe that ADHD was a real thing, but I'm like I grew up conservative. I'm a big, if you want to do it, get it done. It's all about you. Forget excuses or anything else. I started to see a whole bunch of things crop up when I was doing research that I didn't know were ADHD typical behaviors. And then when I went back and I mapped them onto my life, I saw that I had a lot of exceptional... So one thing was the concept of starting a project with a whole bunch of focus, pouring an inordinate amount of time into it, and then never being able to pick up a project again. I didn't know that was like typical of ADHD people. That's one thing. The idea of not being able to manage homework regardless of academic proficiency. For I think 3 or 4 years, I think in grade school, I was the only kid in my class that had to have my assignment notebook signed off on by my teachers and my parents. I couldn't do it. I remember times growing up where I would cry doing homework. I just didn't want to do it. It was so horrible. I remember behaviors relating to, the addictiveness that ADHD people have with regular dopamine scheduled things like video games. Some people call this hyperfocus, but basically if you can find something with a common reward system, you can do it 16 hours a day, stuff like that. I was a pro StarCraft 2 player. I did that. I started to see a bunch of these things crop up, and then and then just the general issue with executive dysfunction. And a lot of these things I didn't really associate with ADHD. I thought ADHD was just like you're hyper and you're running around everywhere, and that wasn't me. I sat at a computer and I played computer games. But fast forward from all of that, I had my son start the medication. It's been really good for him, thankfully. Now, as my future has continued, there was I would never advocate for anybody to do this ever, and I don't advocate, illegal drugs and blah, blah, blah. But I had the opportunity to try a stimulant medication from a friend, and, they made a joke. They're like, oh yeah, you're going to take this, you're going to be bouncing up and down the walls, it's going to be crazy, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, fuck it, And I tried a stimulant medication for the first time in my life. I want to say, I think it was like about a year ago. And it was the calmest, chillest, most focused, relaxed day I think I'd ever had in my life. And I was just super I could choose to do something, I could whatever. And then fast forward 7 or 8 months later, I've had a lot of conversations with friends. I finally get a formal diagnosis. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's try medication and let's see how my life changes. And then if this is something I want for the better or not, I guess. That was try to do the Reader's Digest version of that, but yeah.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Okay.
And so what's your hang up? So you started the medication. It sounds like it allows you to do what you set it out to do. So where's the rub?
Yeah, I guess the hang up is before I started it. So I got the diagnosis and then I got the prescription, and then for 7 days, my issue is always that when it comes to issues of the mind, I'm thinking why not just be less of a lazy piece of shit? That's what I feel like. So when I get out of bed, there's not a guy there that's punching me to stay in bed and to be lazy. There's not a guy holding a gun to my head saying, read your fucking phone for 3 hours. I can just choose not to do it. And there are days where if I have exceptional, mental tenacity and exceptional focus, fuck it, I am going to do all this shit today. I've done it before, but I don't know why I just can't do it every day. So then it feels at some point is this a cop-out to be I'm neurodivergent, I'm executively stupid, and I'm gonna take a fucking pill and I'm gonna pop this and oh cool, it fixed all my problems. Does that say something, I guess, about my character? Does that, yeah.
When you say does that say something about your character, what do you think?
Intuitively, yeah.
What does it say about your character?
That you need some sort of exogenous or external, physical motivator to do something that you should be able to do on your own. This is something you should be able to motivate yourself for on your own. And the fact that you require something external, especially when it comes to neurotransmitters, is something is broken with you. And I don't even know if it's broken. It's just something you're not willing to fix or not willing to put the time or effort into fixing. Yeah.
Okay. And how do you feel about yourself for not putting in the? Do you think it's theoretically possible for you to achieve what you want without stimulants?
I think so. Anytime I have dilemmas like this, I solicit. I ask my fans. I'm like, "What do you guys do?" I'm curious what your thoughts are. So I got a lot of feedback. One thought that stuck with me a lot is a person emailed me and they said, you've been talking about overcoming your ADHD and all of this for 5 years, basically ever since Nathan was diagnosed. And then, look back in your life in 5 years, did you do it? And it's no, not at all. And it's if I could have lived the last 5 years of my life on stimulants, even if I do take the hit to my moral character because I'm not, working as hard on myself, every single other part of my life improves tenfold. I'd be healthier because I'd be going to the gym more often. I would be probably eating better. I would be more focused on my research for my streams. So I'd be a better debater. I'd be a better advocate for my ideas. I'd be managing extra time better for hobbies or extracurriculars, like practicing an instrument, doing rock climbing, whatever the fuck. That even if it was the case that at the end of those 5 years, maybe my moral character is slightly diminished, the gains that I would make in every other part of my life would be so appreciable, it wouldn't even matter. I wouldn't even be thinking about that.
So what's the problem?
Well, when I first messaged you, I was spiraling hard, but now I've gone through a lot of emails and I've thought about it a lot, and I've kind of, I've thought about it more, and I think I feel pretty good, but it is a very weird feeling, standing in line at a pharmacy or waking up and taking a pill. That's just not the type of person I guess I've ever been in my entire life. And then I also feel a lot of other people. Go ahead.
Can I just think?
Yeah. Oh, go for it.
Okay, got a question for you. What do you think is... So what I'm hearing is that on paper, stimulants are a good idea.
Yeah.
For you.
Yeah.
And in actuality, they may be a good idea for you. I'm hearing that you judge yourself quite harshly for needing them, utilizing them, taking the shortcut. Fair?
Oh, is it? Yeah. Yes. I don't know. Yeah, that's true.
Where do you think is the origin of that judgment?
Where's the origin of that judgment? Is the origin of the judgment like, are you asking like why I feel like I need them or why I would judge myself for taking them?
The latter.
The latter.
Former is important too, but let's start with the latter.
Sure. Because I feel like maybe I need to go deeper, you can tell me, but like it feels like I'm shortcutting a process that I should be able to work through.
And where... So that there's a value judgment inherent in that, right? That taking the hard way is superior to taking the easy way. That you should be able to do this.
Yeah.
Should be able to do this better.
Sure. And then that should is it's a comparison of what everybody else around me is like, essentially. That my understanding is most people can decide to do something and do something, and that it's not a huge issue for a lot of these people, whereas I seem to struggle with it sometimes exceptionally. So I should be able to do it. Yeah, most people could do it. Yeah, go ahead.
And what I'm hearing from you is like, okay, so like between this tension, right? So on the one hand, you can do it the hard way, which is like meditate and do whatever else. We can talk about that in a second. Like you can kind of overcome your ADHD as if it's an obstacle. And there is data to suggest, and I don't know if this is kind of what you found, but that you can do that, right? There are outcomes from things like psychotherapy are equivalent to stimulant medication. We can talk about that data in a second, but
okay.
And so there's a tension between kind of taking this shortcut, and then I almost hear you like making justifications to yourself, right? That like, okay, like objectively, if I do this, so I've been dicking around for 5 years, now I'm kind of done. Objectively, like, I could have done so much more. Now that I'm on it, I can accomplish so much more. Why do I need to accomplish so much more? Because of this like complicated, or maybe not complicated, because of this meaty worldview about like social good and paying it forward and existing for the benefit of humanity and all this kind of stuff, right? So there's like all these like big reasons for Steven to take stimulants. And those big reasons fight against, well, I should be able to do it without it. And what I'm hearing you ask is, how do I find the balance between these two things? When is it a cop-out? When is it not a cop-out? When is it the right move? When is it the wrong move? And so you're stuck between these two things.
Yeah, from like a, I guess from like a normative ethics point of view, it's like there's like some virtues that I think are worth aspiring to, but then there's like some like consequential attitudes that are undeniable. So like, for instance, if I could take a pill right now and have the ideal, flawless, perfect body composition, blood levels and everything, like I feel like I shouldn't take that pill. But at some point you do so much math where it's like, well, you know, or you do so much utilitarian calculus, you're like, well, I probably should do this. It wouldn't make sense not to. Like, I almost wonder if I got diagnosed as like a type 1 or type 2 diabetic, would I think that like, well, do I really need insulin, or can I just do like a keto diet and never eat anything on the glycemic index that's above like a 10 ever and I'll be okay? Yeah, it's that kind of thing, I guess. It's balancing out like that virtue with the, I guess with the consequentialist idea or whatever, yeah.
And do you prefer if I call you Steve, Steven, Destiny? What do you prefer?
Steven's good.
Okay. So, Steven, I think, I know this sounds kind of weird, but I mean, you're asking me what my opinion is. So I'm going to say I think you're approaching it wrong.
Okay.
So I think the real answer to this is not, so it's not going to work, basically. So you're kind of fighting like an intellectual, I'm going to call it intellectual. It's not quite intellectual, but you're fighting a battle and trying to figure out what the right answer is.
Sure. I
don't think that's what works well. I think what works really well is understanding your relationship with yourself, understanding the origins of the different pieces, and then even resolving some of the fuel behind your beliefs.
Okay.
So you can have two beliefs that can butt heads, and then you can logically try to decide which one is right. But what I find is far, far, far more effective, and this is like more of a personal value system, is to understand like the way that you relate to things. So I'm going to just toss out a couple of things, okay?
Okay.
The first is there's this interesting concept which I loved learning about and loved teaching about, even though I'm not very good at it, is the psychodynamics of psychopharmacology. So the psychodynamics is kind of like psychodynamic psychotherapy is like sort of based on psychoanalysis. So it kind of has this idea that like we have all these like associations and meanings and interpretations and the way that we relate to different stimuli in our environment. We can dig into that. And there's like a whole way to understand, okay, like my mom didn't hug me and what does that mean to me? And how does that have a subconscious impact? All that crap that we sort of think of as like Freudian psychoanalysis, all that sort of stuff is like the way that we relate to things. There's a whole rich exploration of the way that we relate to taking a pill. So I think this, I don't know if you're doing psychotherapy, but I think sort of like doing psychotherapy around this can be very helpful for people with ADHD. Like, what does it mean to you to take a medication?
Okay.
Because the answer is not should you take one objectively or not objectively. That's part of your treatment plan, and you and your provider will decide based on evidence-based outcomes and all that kind of stuff. But like, what does it mean to you to take this pill? That's a very important exploration. And I think that's ultimately what's going to fix the problem. It's not like the cookie can crumble either way, right? Because you can make a good logical argument either way. So it's not like there is a right answer or wrong answer. Both of them are justifiable courses. The real issue, the real rub, the tension that I'm seeing in you and the struggle that I'm seeing you has nothing to do with the right answer or the wrong answer. It has to do, if you really want to fix that, you have to understand your relationship to the thing. Now, this is where things get, you with me so far?
Yeah.
This is where things get interesting. So let's just talk a little bit about outcomes, stimulants, and all that kind of stuff. So it sounds like you did a lot of research on your kid, or not your kid, but kids with ADHD. And what did you discover?
Well, now I'm a little bit worried because maybe I was looking at the wrong stuff. For most of the...
you were...
Well, I was going to say, for most of the ADHD stuff, I had a really hard time finding meditation or other sorts of interventions in larger studies showing to have positive outcomes similar to medication. The only reason why I finally broke down and got the diagnosis for ADHD is because it felt like stimulant-based medication was like some of the only stuff that showed really good outcomes related to people that were like super big into the ADHD thing. But I might have missed that somehow, or I might have, yeah.
No, okay, we're gonna get into the phrase "broke down" in a second, but
Gotcha.
So let's just understand a couple things about stimulant medication, okay?
Okay.
A lot of people don't realize this. So the first thing is that if you give a child a stimulant, it has very, very good outcomes, generally speaking, for adults.
Okay.
So this is what's really kind of confusing. So let's just illustrate with one example. So some people think that since stimulants are abusable, and we also know that exposing developing brains to substances of abuse will increase the risk of addiction as they develop.
Okay.
So when I have my nucleus accumbens and my dopamine reward circuitry that is developing, and I give it highly dopaminergic stuff, it wires in a different way to where I'm sensitive to substances in the future. So we actually have decent evidence that marijuana is actually a gateway drug. Like that is not, it's not some propaganda or anything. I mean, there may be propaganda around it, but basically we know that if you start using marijuana in your teenage years, you are more likely to develop a neurochemistry that is sensitive to other dopaminergic or addictive substances.
Okay.
So people were worried, right? Because we've got this pile of evidence. And if you give a 7-year-old, oh my God, an amphetamine that is dopaminergic, will it increase his risk of addiction? The answer is almost certainly not. And this confuses the hell out of all kinds of people because we were like, wait a second, because this stuff is highly dopaminergic. What we actually find is when you give a child with ADHD a stimulant, their risk of addiction goes down over the course of their life.
Just because of a change of behavior or?
Great question. So the answer is complicated. The first thing is to understand what a stimulant does. Okay. So a stimulant medication works on the frontal lobes of our brain. So the part of our brain that it actually stimulates is the brakes. So the ability of our brain to restrain other parts of our brain. So if we look at what predisposes people to addiction, it's things like emotional dysregulation, impulsivity. These are both big risk factors for addiction. So when you strengthen the brain and you are no longer as impulsive and you can regulate your emotions, you become less vulnerable to the benefit of substances. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this was in a kind of a roundabout way. For some of the, I'll stay on this topic in particular. One of the emails that I got was, it was an interesting question of like, what do you think damages your brain more in the long run? Having these, amphetamines that are causing these dopaminergic effects in your brain. Wait, say that word again? Dopaminergic effects in your brain. Do you think that hurts your brain more than playing video games and watching porn for 18 hours a day for years and years and years? And if one amphetamine can help you not engage in all of that other horrible behavior, it might be the case that your brain putting the brakes on some forms of like dopamine seeking behavior is actually more beneficial in the long run for addictive behavior than, which seems paradoxical, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think the spirit is spot on, but I think there are a couple of important nuances.
Sure,
specifically
of course, yeah.
with the general principle is true, and that'll apply to everything else I'm about to say. But specifically with the case of stimulants, there are some parts of our brain that are vulnerable to addiction, and what the stimulant medication does is buffer those parts of the brain. Right. So and this is and now we get to so the first thing is that it's interesting because basically several studies have shown that there is certainly not a increased risk of addiction with stimulants. The jury's still out on whether there is a no risk or it's like neutral or it's beneficial. And there's complicated things that get into that, which we're going to get into in a second. But the key thing to understand is that that's number one. Here's the other big thing about stimulant medication in kids. Now, I think, so this is going to sound kind of weird, I think that stimulant medication for kids is not neurodevelopmentally good or healthy. Okay? This is going to sound kind of weird. Because if we just look at developing brains, we basically know that any kind of psychoactive substance does not really help. Like, it doesn't help the developing brain. That's just something that we know. Whether it's caffeine, whether it's nicotine, alcohol, opiates, whatever. So then, but if we look at outcomes of kids with ADHD who get medicated, the outcomes are good. And in fact, there are studies that show that early use of ADHD medication with higher doses leads to better outcomes as an adult. Okay? Like we're talking like 7-8 years. We can look at a population of like 12 to 15-year-olds and then look at them 8 years later, and basically like people who got a lot of stimulants early on did better. There's some confounding factors there because those people may have had a more severe illness and other things like that. But I think this is where a lot of people misunderstand one key point, which I think could be relevant to you. So which is that growing up with untreated ADHD is traumatic. So if you look at populations of people who have depression and ADHD, okay? And then you ask, if you got diagnosed with depression first, what is the likelihood that you will get diagnosed with ADHD later? It is 3%.
Okay.
If you get diagnosed with ADHD first, what is the likelihood you get diagnosed with depression later in life? 70%. There is a very clear causative impact. And this is, by the way, what we see with you. Yeah. Right? So you're like you beat yourself up and all this self-judgment of, and we come down to it's comparison. Like, where does that thought come from? It's because when you were in second grade, you understood that your IQ was the same as everybody else's. But for the life of you, you could just not understand why you could never do homework.
Sure.
I mean, if you think about even what you've said, the memories that you have are so profound because you recall them to this day. You were the only fucking kid in the class who had to have your homework get signed off by your parents and your teacher. And so what happens to that child? The child starts judging themselves very harshly. Why are you so stupid? Why can't you do what other people can do? This is a sign of your weakness. You have this fundamental brokenness. Yeah. Very common.
This was when I was doing research for Nathan, this was the thing that ultimately pushed me over on to do the drugs, is I feel like my obligation as a parent is to make sure that his like growing years and everything in grade school are, because he's already in a split parent household, which has a whole bunch of negative things associated with it. So I could tell him, go to school, fight through this and do that. But then to do that on top of everything else, I don't want to be in a situation where my kid is like 18, he either doesn't qualify for college or he sucks at high school and he's like, Dad, why the fuck didn't you just give me like stimulants when I was in second grade? And then we could deal with whatever negative things, but now you've like ruined my whole life because of some weird feeling that you had about medication. So yeah, that was definitely the thing that pushed me in that direction. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like, I think the key thing that you've got to understand is when I see this conflict, I don't see actually like an intellectual conflict. I see like an emotional self-judgment fueled conflict. And I think the solution to this is not like, is it good or is it bad? It's to actually heal whatever the hurt is that you had with growing up with undiagnosed ADHD and what that's meant for your life. Because like that's the thing. And even the way that you the way that you talk about your child's regrets are like your regrets.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I mean, it's like 1-to-1, because what caused you to change your mind? You were like, well, someone said 5 years ago, if you had started, where would you have been now?
Yeah.
So now we get to another problem, which is regret. And this is where like, now if we really want to go off the rails, like I've seen this a lot, like, why are you trying so hard? I mean, sure, you can construct this whatever social goodness kind of stuff, and like that's good stuff. I'm not saying it isn't. I do that stuff too for social good and all that jazz. But I think that there's a fuel here that has nothing to do with the social good. The fuel has to, and let me know if I'm wrong here, but I think like this regret in the sense of, I get this pressure from you about time. Like, Steven, are you afraid of death?
I mean, sometimes when I'm driving, but no, I don't think, not in general. No, I don't think so.
Do you feel like you've regretted or wasted a part of your life?
I think, I'm trying to think, usually what I'll do, just as a quick thing, I'll have like a feeling and then I try to intellectualize it, and then I try to slowly, if I can think about a thing a little bit differently, the feeling changes over time, essentially, kind of like a bastardized version of CBT, I guess. But the way that I try to view my life is, as long as I feel like I'm on a good road and I feel like I'm happy with myself right now and the road that I'm heading on, I try to view my life as having no regrets, because any particular bad thing that might have happened might have been a contributing factor to who I am now. So I view it all like pretty favorably. So I might have had like things that were, I'll say, suboptimal, relating to upbringing or earlier in my life, but like I view it as all kind of like, these are all part of the stepping stones to who I am now and where I'm going, and I feel really good about those two things, who I am and where I'm going. So yeah.
So that is both really good and really problematic.
Okay.
So I think it's very, very adaptive, and it's exactly what you should be doing, right? You positively, cognitively reframed and all that stuff. You bastardized internal version of CBT, call it whatever you want to, but you're essentially taking your intellect and you're molding your emotions with it. But I think there is more to be gained from understanding where those emotions come from in the first place. So from an adaptive standpoint or functional standpoint, makes perfect sense that what you want to do is like, those emotions are negative. Let's cognitively reframe, adapt, grow, work with this negative regret, try to get rid of this negative regret. But I think the next step, and this is kind of where I see you, and this is why I think you're running into trouble, because I think your tactic won't work for these problems, is my sense. So like you can logic your way to a functional life where you get up every day, you're optimizing things, you're progressing, you're doing well. Right. And this is where, like, when I've worked with people in the past, I don't think this is a problem. I mean, there may be psychological problems related to trauma of growing up with ADHD, but that's between you and your provider and your therapist and all that good stuff. We can talk a little bit more about what that looks like and non-pharmacological approaches if you want to.
Sure.
But I mean, I think this sounds to me like a spiritual crisis more than anything else. Like, that's what it feels like. And these are like bigger, deeper questions of, sure, you can justify, which is what you always end up doing, right? It's like, you can justify this as, okay, like, this was part of my path and it's made me who I am. And like, I'm doing okay in life. So like, I should not regret the past. But what I don't actually hear you doing is metabolizing the regret. I don't hear you getting to the source of that and trying to figure out and I think there's like a tier above this, which is, there may be some problems to me saying that, but which is like understanding that you do regret and that it is okay to regret, and that you can still be happy with what you've accomplished. But I think that's like very hard for you because of like that self-judgment of I should have been perfect.
I understand what you're saying. The spiritual crisis was definitely like probably a year and a half ago, I think, is when I was trying to think of like, do I want to just sit online and kind of, move sideways, do decently, or do I want to be more aggressive with my career? And then that's when I kind of thought more about like obligations to society and all of that. And I feel like, I'll say that was spiritually solved, but obviously there's still other issues that I'm trying to figure out, like medication, right? And that was why in the past year and a half of my career, I've been way more aggressive in terms of doing other things. I do agree with you about what you're saying. You call it metabolizing your regret, but I'm trying to say in other words what you're saying so we can make sure I understand. I think there's a negative thing that people will do where, say you have an abusive parent, where somebody will say something like, actually that abuse was good for me and my life is so much better because of it. And in a way that might be better than walking through life being completely traumatized by it. But like the next level would be saying, well, actually that abuse was really bad for me, but I understand that, I've made peace with it, and then I've overcome it and I'm moving in a forward direction. I feel like for the most part, like there are definitely things in my life when I say I have no regret, I guess we could dig a little bit more meatier into that. Obviously there are things that have not gone as I would have liked it, and there are things that kind of suck in terms of my upbringing, but like I've made peace with those things. I don't think that I don't let them drag me down. Obviously if I could have chosen different types of things in my upbringing, I would absolutely like change the way that some things are, but I think everything's going okay now, so I don't let those regrets like weigh on me, I guess. It's not like Go ahead.
Yeah. So I like, even in your language, I think there's like, and this is what I think is really where there's opportunity for progress, is like actually has nothing to do with whether you should take stimulant medication or not.
Sure.
This is really a fantastic opportunity for you to understand the different currents within yourself. Right. So what I get the sense that you're focused on is when you have conflicting currents, you have a pretty rigorous process of like getting all the troops in line. Right. So like and that's good. I mean, you're good at that. You're gifted at that. It's a useful thing to do. It's adaptive. It's cognitive reframing. It's what we try to do in CBT. But there's like, you're spot on that there's another layer of this, which is to ask yourself, like, why do I feel this way in the first place?
Okay.
Right. Why, like, what is the origin of this judgment? Because imagine if you could get rid of the judgment entirely, not get it in line, but you could understand that. And this is what I think happens is you can cognitively reframe. But basically, if you look at sort of this yogic model of the mind, what happens is when we have negative emotional experiences, those emotions get stored up and they sit in our subconscious mind or our unconscious mind as something called a samskar. And that those emotions will trigger and activate in current circumstances. And so in a situation like yours, what I'm hearing is an echo of the comparisons that you used to make in this idea that you should be able to do what other people are able to do. That is like a core part in CBT. We may call it something like a core belief, right? And so as long as you have that piece, you really need to understand, like, why do I think that way about myself? Because if you sort of think about it, like, logically, right? I mean, everyone's unique. And I know you do this process. This is the part that you're good at. Right. Everyone's unique. Like, you can't always make comparisons, and everyone has advantages and disadvantages. We get a certain amount of stat points to distribute on our character sheet, and that's how it is. I took the ADHD thing for an additional feat at level 1, and that's just how it works. And I got debating proficiency, whatever. Right. So there's whatever breakdown that you have, which you can kind of logically understand. But I think now the question is like, why do you feel this way about yourself? Why is your worldview such that like you should be able to do it without it? Right. And that I think will go back. That I think will go back to like, if you really pay attention to your early experiences in childhood, which, by the way, is another thing that I just connected the dots on. I was really confused the first time we talked because you play games while you're debating with people, right?
Well, I haven't for the past 2 weeks while I've been on amphetamines, but yeah, I understand what you're saying. I used to a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that is not a coincidence that you've stopped. So there's
I don't think it's not at all. Yeah.
There's good evidence that doing a cognitively distracting rote task allows people with ADHD to focus. So when I'm doing group psychotherapy with people with ADHD, I will oftentimes, what I learned at one of the hospitals I worked at is knitting. That if they do some kind of rote or even cognitively mildly engaging task, it actually helps them focus, because they have like too much kind of mental energy, and like dispersing some of it allows them to actually focus.
Yeah.
This is also why people with ADHD sometimes meditate better with their eyes open.
Okay.
So you need some kind of stimulation, which is something that's interesting. And also, if you started stimulant medication, it would make sense.
Yeah, it all
that
tracks.
you no longer need. Yeah. So where are you right now? What are you thinking? Thoughts, questions?
I'm writing down like big concepts, I guess, to keep track of. The first question of like, what does it mean to take a pill? I think there's a lot of room for me to think about and explore how I feel about that, because all of my feelings related to that are negative, and most of them are, I think, really stupid. They're rooted in stupid things. Like, I know that looking on it intellectually. And then why did I write this down? I wrote judgment in big caps. Oh, why do I judge myself, I guess, or against like what standard do I judge myself? I mean, I feel like judgment is probably a necessary part of, or you were going to say something. Sorry, go ahead.
No. Yeah. I think you're okay. So let's talk about pills for a second. So
Okay, sure.
Why do people have stupid beliefs, Stephen?
For all sorts of different reasons. I mean, they could be maladaptive. It could be
Sure.
they learned it from other.
No, but I mean, like, why do people develop stupid? Like, so you said, okay, I have all kinds of attitudes towards medication that are stupid. Then why do you have that attitude? Where does that attitude come from?
It's probably an inherited belief that's largely unexamined because it doesn't come up much in daily life. Basically, yeah.
Okay, so I think that's one way to put it. I would chalk it up to an experience, which could be what you call an inherited belief.
Yeah,
I think
my dad and my grandpa
right?
were like, I don't believe in medicine.
Right.
I don't care about this. And then now I'm like, if I get a headache, I don't like to take ibuprofen or Advil, which is stupid, but it doesn't come up that much, so I don't examine it that much. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think it's an inherited belief. I think it's a learning, is what I would call it.
Oh, sure.
So
when I say
even
inherited,
though-
I mean like you learn it. But you're right. Yeah, learn is a better word.
Right,
for sure.
right. So you had some experience early on in life where like maybe you were sick and like the doctor recommended that you take ibuprofen and you were really hurting, and you were like, Dad, should I take the ibuprofen? He's like, ibuprofen is for sissies. You don't take ibuprofen. And then you felt guilty or bad because you really wanted it and the doctor said, but you didn't want to be weak. Right. And then like that whole thing starts. I mean, I have no idea if that's actually what happened, but that's an example.
Okay, sure.
So I think one thing to understand anytime you examine your stupid beliefs is you can do the cognitive reframing stuff. But I have found it to be very, very helpful to understand the origins of your experience and why that became a truth for you and how that became a truth for you. Because at some point it was learned. That's why you believe it. Right. Second thing about judgment is I think exploring the origins of your self-judgment are very important.
Okay.
And so if you really want to, because right now what's happening is you have a clash between like a self-judgment and a logic.
Okay.
Right?
Can I give you my idea about judgment first so that we're using the same words?
Yeah.
So I feel like judgment is a necessary part of your self-analysis because it allows you to more closely align yourself with whatever your idealized version with yourself is. So for instance, let's say that I think I should be somebody that is truthful to my friends around me. And then let's say that in the past I lied to somebody, then I would want to judge myself as failing to meet those types of expectations that I would have for a more idealized version of myself. That would be what I would consider like a judgment. Not necessarily like,
sure.
Yeah, but I just want to make sure we're using the word in the same way. So yeah, you can tell me if that, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, so I think the problem is that the direction of the judgment and the idealized, what the target is, it can be based on bad stuff.
Okay.
Right? So you're right that judgment is a self-correcting. We have this part of our brain that does something called counterfactual thinking, which is, and it's kind of a weird term, but when we make a mistake, there is a factual representation of what happened. And we have a part of our brain that thinks in a counterfactual way. So you could think about it as hypothetical, but our brain goes back and rewrites history outside of the facts. And that is one of the ways that we learn from our mistakes and correct our behavior. So you're right that I think judgment is, it's a judgment that you place that has the direction towards an idealized self. But the problem is that that idealized self and that judgment can come from unhealthy places to begin with.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
So what I'm saying is that's what needs to be examined.
Okay. Then I guess the question would be like, is the ideal that you're aspiring to unhealthy to some extent? I feel like that's what
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we get to the big problem of like I think like. So I think you've come up with a very intellectually sound, dharmic, ethical, utilitarian approach to what you want to do with your life. But that's all coming from up here. And what I'm really hearing you need to do is integrate that with like the other parts of your mind.
Yeah, of course.
Right? Because I think that's where you're going to find your balance. Because right now there's a conflict, which means that one side is going to win and one side is going to lose.
Or, well, ideally, one side is integrated into the other. If you run into a huge incongruence with the mind and the feeling, at some point you have to examine why and then bring one of them into alignment with the other at some point, right? Hopefully.
Yeah, so I think in that integration process, one piece is going to lose.
Okay. I disagree. Or let's talk about that, actually. Yeah, because I feel like I don't agree with that 100%. I'll give an example, and then you can talk me through why you think that. I'm curious. So let's say that let's say that I feel like shoot, I don't want to use like, well, no, we'll say a negative thing, okay? Let's say that I want to play video games for 16 hours a day. But like intellectually, I know that it's probably not healthy to play video games for 16 hours a day. But I really like playing video games. So at some point, I ration this out to like, well, I think playing like 1 or 2 hours a day, maybe, that's healthy. Like I would view that as a sort of compromise where I don't know if I would say one side is lost or not, but maybe you would frame it as like one side is lost, like the emotional side of wanting to play for, yeah, go ahead, tell me.
Absolutely, right? Because one side of you wants to play for 16 hours a day.
But like maybe the intellectual side wants to play for like 0 hours a day, like don't play video games at all. But then you like compromise.
Sure. So both anytime you integrate or compromise, both sides lose.
Okay, that's
right.
Okay, sure. Okay, gotcha.
Right. So my point is that there's a different way, and I think it's fine. What you've done is awesome. Like I'm not trying to, I think like the higher you climb on the MMR scale, the harder things get, and the more subtle they become.
Sure. Okay.
So I think there's another way to go about this, which is to metabolize the root of why do I want to play 16 hours a day in the first place. It's not about reconciling two parts. It's about getting to the source of like, what does 16 hours a day mean to me? What's important about this?
Okay.
And then as you get down that road, something cool happens, which is that the desire kind of melts away. And then you're sort of left without either side. And then you're kind of like, you can just sort of make a choice and you're not being like driven by these two different things.
Sure. Can you expand on that when you say the desire melts away? Like, can you think your way through wanting to ever play video games? Yeah. What do you mean by that? Can you expand on that?
Theoretically, you can think your way through that. There is a subset of the practice of yoga. I'm not talking about the postures. I mean like the traditional meaning of the word yoga, which is like paths to enlightenment, called Jnana Yoga, which is the yoga of knowledge.
Okay.
So one major text of that is this text called the Brahma Sutra, which is like a text that talks about logical argument. So it's like a text on argument, basically. But there are, theoretically, it is possible. It's not logic, it's more contemplation. And then like if you kind of think about, so theoretically, maybe it's possible. It's something that when I was learning, I was taught that this is the hardest path of yoga, of which there are very, very few true yogis who like really know how to do this anymore. Because it's not logic, it's contemplation. But the other way that I would think about it is, first of all, does that answer your question or what was your question?
What do you mean when you talk about like the dissolution of desire, I guess? I kind of thought it was going to be, I don't know if there was like when you just do this, but I've heard of like the far more complicated ones, right? Yeah, go ahead. But there is absolutely a dissolution of desire. So like this is where things get kind of cool, which is like the more that you explore the origin of whatever your desires are, the more you will discover that there is nothing at the bottom. Okay.
Right? So we assume that the things that we want are like real. But like once you realize the origin of the want, you realize that, oh, this is like not a real thing. It's just, so like just to give you a simple example, let's say I want to play a particular video game. So I've been on the fence about buying Starfield. Okay. Because I don't know, right? And so if I really look at, okay, do I want to buy the game? Do I not want to buy the game? I draw a logical argument about reasons to buy Starfield, reasons to not buy Starfield. And I can go back and forth, but the real antidote to that is like, why do I want Starfield in the first place? What am I looking for? And the more and more I go into myself, the more I realize, okay, like, what is the origin of my desire for Starfield? I saw an ad about it. What is the origin of my desire? I saw people talking about it. What is the origin of my desire? Oh, like I enjoyed playing Morrowind and Oblivion so much that I long for that experience again. And then as I sit down and I engage in some degree of like reflection and contemplation, okay, so like I've had things that I enjoyed in the past. Do I want to hold on to that? I don't need to. I can just appreciate that for what it is. And it's kind of weird, but at like the end of that process, there's just nothing there.
Is it necessarily good to dissolve all of your desires? I don't know how Buddhist we're getting, but like the counterclaim I'm going to say is like, well, what if you have a desire to be like a good father or a good parent? Like, would you want to drill down? Go ahead.
It depends on what your goal is. So when you say good, how are you defining that end zone?
Good, normatively, morally. Like, it sounds like dissolving a desire to partake in a vice is tautologically good because vices are bad. And if you can dissolve your desire to have a vice, you've done something good, right? We move away from vice and towards virtue. That's what I'm thinking. Good. You've made yourself a better person, improved your character, I guess.
So I'm going to say, a couple things. The first is that there's a subset of spiritual practitioners called Aghori Babas.
Okay.
Ghor means fear.
Okay.
Aghor means lack of fear.
Okay.
So these are people who intentionally engage in vice-like behavior as part of their spiritual progression.
Okay.
Now, in this case, vice-like behavior includes marijuana, eating of meat, even cannibalism in some cases.
Okay.
And they actually intentionally expose themselves to negative things to try to transcend this like tautological idea of like good and bad.
Okay.
So they drink alcohol and get high and eat fish and meat and sleep in cemeteries and stuff like so. There's a spiritual path that kind of does that, but then the goal there is that this idea that this tautology between good and bad is actually like a human construction, and that it's not a real thing. That it's kind of this non-dualism, which is like a philosophical view that most of the yoga practitioners kind of take. It's the dominant school that has emerged historically.
Okay.
So first thing is that there's a perspective that tautologically good and bad is not a real thing, and it's just these are judgments that we make, right? And we know that good and bad changes over time because people used to think something is good, now they think it's bad. Okay. So what's really good or bad?
Sure.
Second thing is, from a more practical perspective, I think that for 99% of people, moving on this path will improve their life in a significant way. But if you really look at the precision of it, abandoning desire makes you not a good citizen in the world of life. So if your goal is to break free of the cycle of suffering and to become enlightened and achieve whatever your highest human potential is, which can be viewed as virtuous, and there's a whole fun angle there, right? So like, but as you become more and more enlightened, like you don't behave the way that a normal person will. Generally speaking, I think that, like I said, for 99% of the times, that's good. But let's remember that like when Buddha started his journey on his enlightenment and also became enlightened, he basically abandoned his wife and child and kingdom and pursued something else. I think most people don't get there.
Sure.
But technically, if you want to really get to it, like you could say, okay, so there are yogis in the Himalayas who have been meditating in caves for 40 years. What good are they doing in the world? Who knows?
Okay.
That's my answer. I don't know if that answers your question.
What was this originally about? What it means to dissolve your desires? Okay. It was good enough.
Is that good?
Gotcha.
Right. So I think it will lead to less suffering. But the interesting thing, the reason people get scared about it is because as we dissolve our desires, we also lose some things that give us a compass in life, like ambition.
Sure. I think I probably would agree with that. That like people reframe a lot of things negatively that are probably actually important parts of society. So for instance, like feeling negative when your peers judge you, or feeling competitive or a pressure to do something socially is probably an important part of the human experience in terms of like building societies, because we want to feel like we can pressure people to act in certain ways, stuff like that, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think one of the biggest mistakes we make in our society is that assuming that negative emotions are bad. Like, there's a
agree with that,
reason
yeah.
why every human being feels anger, feels shame, feels guilt. And it's fascinating because as people move away from their negative emotions, that's actually when they get stuck. Because if you kind of think about it, like I did a YouTube video about this, but it's a fascinating concept that like everyone avoids shame, but shame is the most powerful corrective motivating force in you as a human being. And so when you start suppressing shame, you literally neuroscientifically lose out on the ability to learn from mistakes and adapt to circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. There's a quote that I had when I was a StarCraft 2 player 13 years ago, but the quote was like, to achieve perfection is to sacrifice growth. And the idea is that like if you don't feel an impetus to change or to improve or do something, then you've essentially like cut yourself off from any motivating forces to actually change or be better. So yeah, I think I would agree with that.
So the interesting thing is that as you dissolve more desires, you become more free and you can end up choosing to act compassionately, which is usually what happens.
That's good.
So I think getting rid of ambition is only scary until you discover that there are other compasses, and most people want the compass instead of ambition because ambition is like relentless.
Okay.
And it kind of drives you as opposed to you controlling it.
I feel like
and the freedom.
No, go.
Yeah. The freedom to choose is liberating. And oftentimes when people are truly free to choose, they make the right choices.
Okay. My second monitor is here, so I'm looking at you, but it looks like I'm not looking at you. But just so you know, you're right there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Did you want to walk down this road anymore? Or do you want to move to another area, or?
Well, did I answer your question?
Something that would. This is very difficult for me. I think something that would help push me along a little bit. It's very hard for me to find role models since my job and everything I do is like so unique. It's really hard to find people in the world that I would go like, oh, this guy's doing something. I want to be more like him. I think that when you give me this kind of overarching like dissolution of desires, the freedom to choose better paths, oftentimes the path that you choose post dissolution will be better than the more hardline road you run prior to that. It would be interesting if there were people that I could look at that were achieving or accomplishing in my arena those types of things that had made those decisions. Does that make sense? So for instance, something you're telling me is the ambition driver, the ambition engine might feel good because it pushes and pushes and pushes, but that if you could dissolve everything underneath that and then make other choices, it might be better. But I mean, obviously, intellectually and emotionally, I'm very tied to that ambition engine. And it's hard for me to, I'm hearing what you're saying, but there's a lot of disbelief without me being able to find somebody in the world and go like, oh, that person did that. And I see they're doing, like, I aspire to that. I want to aspire to that. So it would push me in that direction. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, but so do you? I'm getting kind of this tacit idea that I need someone to not need, but if I set a role model for myself, it helps motivate my behavior.
It could, or like if there's a particular habit that's good, I like to see the proof of concept of that, I guess. So like if somebody tells me something like, oh, like you met me a year ago and I told you that I was going to read, one book a week. And then they talked to me about, the 52 different books they read last year just because they found some like novel way to work reading into their schedule. Like maybe they read like 2 pages after every League of Legends game. If I see that, then in my life, I'd be like, holy crap, this guy has a really good outcome. He had a really cool process for doing it. I'm going to copy that. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Yeah. So when you talk to me about the dissolution thing, I'd be curious. To see. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know who you would consider a good role model. I don't think that. So the only thing that comes to my mind is my own experience with my own journey.
Okay.
But I don't think that I am an appropriate role model for you. I think we're colleagues, and I'm happy to share what that experience looked like for me. And the reason that I'm advocating for it is because I think it has been profoundly positive in my life.
Okay. Can you actually, so then I'm kind of curious, for however much you're obviously comfortable sharing, you have, from everything that I've seen, you've got an awesome family, you've got an awesome like company, and you do really cool stuff online. How do you balance out, how do you balance out? What's the emotional decision? Somebody comes to you with an offer or an ability to expand your business, twofold. You've got an opportunity to do this, but it might come at like significant cost to your family. What does the process look like for you? How do you even begin to have that internal dialogue? Yeah. What is that? Yeah.
Yes. So I can share my own experience. So to begin with, like, I wanted to be big when I was growing up. Like, I wanted to be an important person. I grew up Indian. An Indian diaspora in the United States means that you've got a couple of career choices.
Yeah.
There's a very strong founder effect. So there's like serious brain drain. So all the Indian kids. So I grew up in a city where there were 5 people my age in the whole city. There were 5 Indian people in my grade in the whole city. 3 of us became doctors. Right. So that's like, it's just staggering. So I grew up with this culture that was very like education focused, achievement focused. Not tiger parents, but that's just kind of the culture. Like, my parents were very loving and supportive. And so I grew up and like, when I was 15 or 16, I told people I wanted to be a doctor, and they got impressed with that because, Alok is such a smart boy, right? And then that fed my ego. And then when I went to UT, I was a freshman and I majored in pre-med, and I was like, I'm gonna be at the top of my class. And where did I want to go to med school? I wanted to go to med school at Harvard because that's where all the Indian kids want to go. And so when that ambition was my primary driving force, I found that it could not conquer the other parts of myself, because there was a part of me that wanted to play for 16 hours a day. And so those two parts would fight. And because of whatever, on some days I would study and on some days I wouldn't. And certainly not good enough to get into any medical school for that matter. So that changed when I went to India, and I sort of discovered a different way of like looking at myself and like understanding like where my ambition comes from.
Can you real quick, how old were you when you went to India?
21.
Okay, cool. Okay, go ahead.
And then, so I then decided to become a monk. And then, but that too was like actually the same driving forces. What I later discovered is that I had concluded logically that like I can't compete with these kids. Like, there's no way I'm going to be able to achieve my goals and what I want. And I'm basically a failure at life. So what I did is I did this really interesting ego trick where I started devaluing that which I could not have.
Okay.
Right. So, like all these kids are materialistic and they're shallow and they all want to, make lots of money and drive fancy cars and things like that. I'm going to rise above that and become spiritual.
Sure.
So I'm going to have this ego. Huh?
I was going to say that's super common. Yeah. That when somebody can't have something, they start to say, well, actually that sucks anyway. And this has been way better and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Right. So I kind of went down that road, and then thankfully my teachers recognized that my desire to become a monk was not like genuine. It was escapism. So they didn't take me, but they continued teaching me. And then, the big irony is at some point I gave up on my dreams. Right. I was like, there's no fucking way. I graduated with a 2.5 GPA, applied to med school for 2 years, got 110 rejections. 80 something rejections. Applied my third year, got another 20, 30, 40 rejections. And at that point, like after my second year, I had kind of this formative moment where I started thinking about, okay, like, what do I want? And then I changed the way that I started looking. It's not about desire or anything like that. Like, I kind of let go of all that stuff. And I was like, my teachers told me to do something, so I'm going to do it out of like faith, not out of personal desire or ambition or anything like that. I trust these people, and they said do this, so I'm going to do this.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Everyone else told, yeah.
So you coming from the U.S. and you being really ambitious, and then you kind of like changing your ambitions to different things. Why were you in a state where you would trust those teachers? Or what do you think made it that you were like, you know what, I'm going to put aside my ego a little bit and trust these guys, instead of just like, you know what, screw these guys, they're dumb. I'm going to go back and follow my own stuff.
So I would say that if you are a GSL champion in StarCraft and you queue up against someone who just installed the game, this is what my interactions with them were like.
Okay.
They just crushed. I mean, it wasn't competitive, but they just bodied me every single time. They understood so much about me that I did not understand, and they taught me all of that stuff about myself.
Okay, so they basically they'd earn their respect with just the knowledge.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, right. So they like helped me understand like how to live, like these fundamentals, because we don't teach that. We don't teach people how their mind works. And then the other cool thing is they never asked me to have faith or trust in them. My teachers were good. They also recognized that what I needed was questions, not answers. They also did a good job of answering whatever questions I had, which in many spiritual traditions is like not very good. So it didn't matter how hard the question was that I asked. They like basically always had a good answer.
Okay.
And so based on that, I was like, okay, these people know what they're talking about. And I think there's a lot of legitimacy to this. I also, in that process, started to trust more into it because I started looking into the science. I was very skeptical of all this meditation stuff when I started. I didn't believe it. I thought it was all BS.
Okay.
And then I got my first research position studying complementary alternative medicine, and that was a very formative experience for me too.
Okay.
This is a roundabout way of saying, like, as I gave up on my ambitions and just focused on, let's call it being a better person or accomplishing whatever, like a different kind of internal compass, I actually floated to the top of like the competitive pool.
Okay.
And then my ambitions re-emerged when I actually started. So I did medical school at Tufts, and then I matched at psychiatry at Harvard and Mass General and McLean, which are like the best programs in the country. I'm sure other people will disagree. UCLA is really good. Stanford's really good. Yale is really good. Hopkins is really good. A lot of great programs, but based on the academic status ladder or whatever, those were the top programs in the country.
Okay.
And so I kind of found myself there. And then one thing that I quickly realized is I'm not like these people. So I remember like being in the line to get coffee at 4 p.m. with a fellow intern of mine. And he was an internal medicine intern. And man, like I was just talking to him about like medicine, and like what he knew was just mind boggling. Like he was just so brilliant. And that was my experience there, is that people here are just like absurdly brilliant.
Okay.
And I didn't even have imposter syndrome. I think I would have had imposter syndrome if I didn't understand how to do this stuff with my mind. So I was like, all right, I ended up here anyway. So like, even if I don't belong, whatever. And then I actually like, once again, sort of leaned in on a different kind of compass of, okay, what do I want? And then my desires started emerging again, because I started to get prominence. I started to achieve things there. I started to float to the top in some places. Even in those institutions. And then I started to get ambitious. And then I started a private practice. And I had people coming to my office for my help who were CEOs of major companies and billionaires and things like that. And I was like, all right, this is what the goal is, right? It's to like become an expert, become the best in the world at something, and then have people come to your office and pay you, or companies pay you piles of money to go out there and share your wisdom, which is like exactly what I wanted to do. And then I sort of realized a little bit after that this is silly. Like this is the same stupid ambition. And that there's actually a class of people out there that need help just as much or even more, who no one is helping. No one is even listening to. No one is even talking to. And those are degenerates on Twitch.
Yeah. Okay. Before we move here, can I ask you a challenging question? I'm curious.
Yeah.
So my interactions with you are fairly limited, but I've seen a lot of your stuff. We've spoken a lot. My perception of you is you're an incredibly intelligent individual. I'm sure part of that has been through your upbringing. Part of that is probably your parents are probably smart. I'm sure there's a mixture there. Do you think that you went through the path that you did, and rather than kind of like gunning for the top and being ultra ambitious and being obsessed with the prestige, you did a lot of work to kind of like discover or build yourself up as a character, and then the other stuff kind of came as a byproduct of that self-improvement, that mental like self-improvement? Do you think that the same process would work to make most people successful if they weren't exceptionally bright or intelligent? So say you take a kid.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You think so?
I mean, give me your example.
Yeah, I was going to say you take a kid who, drops at a high, I'm giving you an extreme one, but 16, 17, reads at a, 4th or 5th grade reading level, not very bright, doesn't have very many interests or hobbies. And this kid's like, you know what, I'm going to go discover myself mentally. Do you think that this person would benefit in the same way that you did from that type of, mental self-discovery?
I do not think anything is 100%, but I feel 100% confident in that strategy. And here's why.
Okay.
So what do you think I gained in that process? So if I have a character sheet, what do you think that got me? Do you think it got me XP? Do you think it got me skill proficiencies? Like, how do you conceptualize what I went through? Because you're saying, like, what I'm hearing you say is like, okay, is it predicated on your inborn talent? We'll get to that in a second.
Sure.
That's kind of what I'm hearing your question as.
A little bit, yeah. The way that I would frame it is, or the way that I would see it is, we kind of, I think as we grow up in a society, you've been like to bumper bowling, I imagine, right? Do you know what bumper bowling is? Never mind. I'm so sorry. But like a lot of people have kind of like different rails or different restrictions on them. It's where you go bowling, but instead of gutters, they've got bumpers there for like 4-year-olds, so you can't go in the gutter basically. Yeah. Not relevant. But that you grow up, you've got a lot of restrictions. You've got to kind of you get a lot of thought patterns from society. You get a lot of like direction from people around you, and I guess going to a different environment with these guys allowed you to kind of like shed a lot of those societal expectations, a lot of those dispositions you had, and just let you really explore and build and work on yourself. And then once you kind of like fully fleshed out and understanding yourself, you're able to re-engage with society and then explore those things. That would be,
Perfect, right? Okay. So now my question to you is, so like we all go through life with the instrument of our body, our mind, and I'm going to toss this word out there because I think it's complete and we can talk about this if you want to, and our soul. Okay? So we go through the world always with us. Like when you're playing a first person game here, and you can't ever zoom out of it. Like you're you. And so what I learned in India, and why I think it doesn't matter what your IQ is, and I've got evidence of sorts, but we'll talk about that in a second, is that all I learned was how I work. Okay. So it's like, if you don't know how a keyboard works, how effective are you going to be at typing? If you are blind to a keyboard, if you are numb to your internal environment, and there are studies that show that there's 6 or 7 neuroscientific deficits that lead to addiction. Okay. And one of them is a lack of awareness of your internal environment. And what this clinically looks like is someone will say, I don't know what happened. I slipped up. No, there's a whole series of subconscious stressors, pressures, willpower degradation, lack of sleep. There's 1,000 things that are going on, which is responsible for your behavior on this particular day. We're just blind to it.
Sure.
So I think that, anytime we're numb or blind to, and think about this for a second. If I am numb or blind to the driving forces, which doesn't mean they stop driving, it just means I'm not aware of them.
Yeah.
Right? And then what happens is actually exactly what you did with this conversation, which is I have this conflict between these two things, and I'm not trying to shit on you here. But it's a great example. I have a conflict between these two things, and what is the logical answer? But the real answer that I'm offering, because this is my perspective, it's my bias, it's my experience, is that if you understand the origin of those two perspectives, it's not about which one is right, it's about where does this come from? And that has very real utility. And this is where, if we want to talk about evidence, so like from an anecdotal perspective, this is what I advocate for people like my patients and my clients and things like that. It's what I advocate to my kids. And I think that those people tend to be pretty happy. They tend to have good outcomes. Sometimes those outcomes are scary, like makes me wonder whether I'm making a mistake, and I've sought supervision around that. So for example, like 30% of people who come into my office within 12 to 18 months will change their job. Okay. And so I started getting scared about, like, am I biasing these people and pushing these people to make a change? Because that shouldn't be happening. And then what I sort of ended up concluding is that as we start this process, what people realize is that they start shedding their conditioning or their socialization or living a life of shoulds and start gravitating towards what they want. They start changing their jobs. Okay. And they tend to be like predominantly happy after that process, and oftentimes, paradoxically, even more successful. Okay. And then there's also, I mean, if you look at, now we can talk about real evidence, because my anecdotal experience ain't worth much, honestly, if we look at it scientifically. If we look at real evidence, we can look at studies on mindfulness, on meditation, on developing narrative, on healing trauma. And there isn't, I haven't seen, any evidence, I mean, maybe that it's out there, but that this only works for people who are very talented. In fact, the whole point of mindfulness and the reason that we have it as an evidence-based intervention as a part of psychotherapy is it works for people on the autism spectrum. It works for people with Down syndrome. It works for people with low IQ, high IQ, men, women, old, young. It works for everybody because it's a fundamental facet of like our wiring, and it's how our brain works. And when we strengthen our frontal lobes, it helps us with impulse control, right? That's like a neuroscientific fact. So I don't think that, I mean, I'm happy to be challenged. I think it's a great question, but I don't think it's specific to me.
Okay. Yeah, no, I was just curious what your answer would be. I think I probably agree. I think if you take a person that is underachieving in school and then they become more introspective, self-reflective, and get a greater understanding of themselves, it's hard to imagine that their life doesn't also significantly improve in other ways. Because my guess would probably be that those people that are in those bad situations are probably more inhibited than an average person when it comes to those introspective things. So opening that up would help them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
That's a brilliant assumption that you're making, because that's like literally that's what happened in my case, what we see a lot, right? So the worse your situation is, if we think about what is the effect on a human being of a bad situation, it hurts. And then our instinctive response when something hurts is to numb it.
Sure.
Because we haven't been taught how to fix it. So then we ignore it. And then what we actually see is people in bad situations are more introspectively blind. Let me think about that. I don't think that's an evidence-based statement, but that's my opinion.
Sure. I can imagine it being the case that depending on the negative situations you grow up in, you examine negative behavior, it becomes normalized, and then you unleash that behavior into the world, and you lose the ability to even analyze introspectively if it's good or bad in the way, because it's just what you've always seen or something like that. Yeah. Sure. Okay. Yeah,
I mean, I think it's worked for me. Now, I think there's also like a couple things to notice. I mean, the path that I'm on is financially less than the path that I used to be on, right? So there are costs. And then in terms of how do I navigate that, I really think about what's the point of money. And, it's not a way of keeping score. I mean, sure, like I could buy more stuff, but like, I don't. I mean, I'm a degenerate gamer. Like, what do I need money for?
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Right. So like some amount of security and stuff is really important, right? So and that's also where when I sort of think about it, like being freed of my internal drivers, I can kind of make a logical decision about how much do I want to do for free. So even if you look at like the pricing in my private practice, there was one point where there was at one point 50 to 70% of my patients were free care, and it was my financial situation was fine because I charged enough to the other 30 to 50%. And I had a uniform financial policy, which was, this is what my rate is, pay what you can.
Okay.
So I think some of those kind of, the dust kind of settles. I don't know how, like once you're internally, like your compass is set, then you sort of like can logically think through stuff and it kind of settles.
Okay. That makes sense. I think I have like a similar idea. I don't know how well I follow it, but I have a similar idea kind of to what you're saying. I think in the business world, have you ever heard the term like first principles?
I've heard the term. I don't know what it means.
Just basically like what are you orienting yourself towards? Like what are you about? Like what are you trying to do? And what you're saying is like anytime somebody would come like for advice, like I don't know, where do I want to go to college? What do I want to do for a job? Blah, blah, blah. Kind of like what you're saying, like those questions are never really important. The important question is like, well, what do you want to accomplish or who do you want to be in like 5 or 10 years or whatever? And then once you have like those like very fundamental questions figured out, all the other questions become pretty simple. So I think kind of what you're saying about like figuring out kind of like the internal area of like what does it mean to take a pill or where does self-judgment come from or anything like that. Then if I've like figured out those types of things, then the questions about like medication or whatever, not really difficult questions at all, they kind of fall into line very simply. And I think that's so there's like scientific
support of that. So like even so part of the reason I started a coaching program was because I thought that there are some of these things, like coming down to first principles, were not emphasized in the mental health space. So just one example of that is the number one variable that correlates with vulnerability to pornography addiction is meaninglessness in life.
Okay.
So, but if we sort of think about it, we actually have evidence-based approaches to cultivate purpose and meaning and direction, which are all introspective.
Okay.
But, and so what happens if you look at the literature on positive psychology, when you cultivate introspection, the rest of the stuff falls into place. And the whole reason behind purpose, and this is why we teach so much about dharma or dharma, right, is once you have that North Star, then stuff starts to fall in place.
Okay.
And the more important thing is that, and then we see these scientific benefits, which is that even though we're not treating pornography addiction, you just have to have a reason to not watch pornography. Like you have to have something in your life that is guiding you, pushing you. Because what happens with pornography addiction or video game addiction is it just fills up the empty space in your life and it drags you down.
Sure. I think there's a lot of antisocial behavior that falls into this. Like when you ask like a prep school kid, like what did you have to do in your life to not commit armed robbery? They don't really have an answer because they were going to school in the morning for band practice. They were doing football practice after school. Their mom and dad picked them up. They were like, there's not even a question of why you would do that because that kind of like thing in your life is filled by so many other things. So this seems to track from what I understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did we get to your original concern about, do you want to talk more about stimulants and kind of outcomes and what to expect and how to think about it?
Sure. I have one more big question on that if you want to,
sure.
And then you can go from wherever. Yeah. Another thing that's difficult for me. Okay. We're changing gears significantly. Okay. So, pre versus post taking some kind of like mind altering medication. Something that's very difficult for me is how do you figure out what is a positive effect of a drug that's helping you live a better life versus what's just like you being high and like having a good time. So some real examples I'll give of this is there's a lot of things that seem to overlap in terms of like getting high and then also like not having ADHD. So I don't know how many of these things are true, but I've read something that like if you sometimes overeating can be like a factor when it comes to ADHD people, that if you have like a bag of cookies, every time you walk by, you want to grab one, even if you're not necessarily hungry. And then I noticed that like if I've had amphetamines, I can have anything in the house and I just won't eat it because I'm not tempted to. But like, am I actually making a better choice to not do that? Or am I just too high to want to eat? And there's a lot of, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Neither.
Okay.
So let's understand the neuroscientific mechanism behind why you eat cookies when you have ADHD.
Yeah. Okay. Go for it.
This is generality. This is great. This is like a med school question. So let's understand this, right? So why do you eat cookies if you're not hungry? So people with ADHD are impulsive, which means that they engage in impulsive behavior. So if you look at like even the packaging on a cookie, the packaging on a cookie is designed to evoke an impulse. So you have, I'm not saying corporations are evil or anything like that, but it's not my area of expertise. But we all know that cookie companies design packages to evoke impulses. And then you have a brain that is vulnerable to impulses in a way that is, so normally what happens in the brain is we have all kinds of integration of signals. Okay? So you have, for example, like a glucagon level and a leptin level and a ghrelin level. And all of these like levels, insulin, glucagon, leptin, and ghrelin, are all in some fucking tango to tell you when to eat a cookie. Okay? So what happens in the case of ADHD is it's kind of like an impulsive behavior. Since it's around and there's an environmental trigger and a sensory input before you even realize what you're doing, and you don't even realize it's not a conscious choice, it's just an impulse that you give into because your capacity to restrain impulses is low. So this is why, for example, like, people with ADHD benefit from clean areas, because what you really want to do is extend. So the key thing about impulses is, let me just think about how to say this.
Yeah, sure.
So if you're someone with ADHD and you're struggling with impulsive behavior, the main thing that you need to understand is that the impulse is not sustained. It's an impulse. So what you really need to do, if you get distracted, is you need to ride out the impulse.
Okay.
So what's happening, the reason people in our society are getting fucked right now by ADHD is because our society is greasing the wheels for impulsive behavior. So this used to have a lock code. And now it has a thumbprint. Now it has Face ID. So if an impulse lasts half a second, I can pick up the phone. And the phone remembers which website. Now I have a notification too. So I have an impulse for 1 second. And in that second, what can happen? I can look at the phone. The phone auto unlocks. I don't even have to try to unlock it. I just have to point the phone at my face. And then it auto unlocks. I see a notification. I click on the impulse. There go 30 minutes. So what happens with stimulant medication is we are restraining the impulsiveness.
Okay.
Which I don't think that you're making. You weren't making conscious decisions in either case, right? Your brain is processing that a cookie is there. It just, the impulse is controlled by whatever other directed behavior you have.
Gotcha. Okay. It's hard to, emotionally, it's hard to process that. But I mean, intellectually, it makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. So what makes it hard for you to emotionally process that? This is great. Things are coming full circle. Well, because intellectually, everything you're saying makes sense. I feel like as people, I think we tend to think of ourselves as being more cognitive than we actually are. So things like impulses don't like fit into our cognitive understandings of ourselves. Like, why would I do something on an impulse? I'm choosing to do every single thing I'm doing. So the idea that like now I'm not making a really bad choice, but it's not a choice, it's just an impulse that I'm not acting on. That's like, it's just a hard thing to emotionally intuit for me, I guess. Yeah. Did that make sense?
Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, but I think so let me tell you what I heard.
Sure.
Okay. You said, am I not eating because I'm high?
Yeah.
Versus the ADHD. So like, what is the emotional valence of each of those options? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it's full circling back to the original question of I guess of like the character question, kind of, or am I where? So
let's say one of those things is true. How do you feel about yourself?
Yeah, there's a different judgment. Like, if I'm not
absolutely
eating, yeah, exactly, yeah. If I'm not eating,
in both cases, it's a negative judgment.
Well, yeah,
you see that? Because on the one hand, fuck, right? Fucking Steven is taking his fucking high pills, and sure, he's not eating cookies, which would be progress, but why aren't we eating cookies? Because we're fucking high.
Well, there's one.
You see that?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I slightly disagree, but I understand what you're saying. The difference here is I think I largely have kind of sort of made peace with myself in terms of like taking the drug, but the rationalization in my mind is that like I think taking the drug is okay as long as I'm elevating myself to just a baseline level of impulse control. So if it is the case that I'm doing the medication appropriately and I'm at a baseline level of impulse control and I'm not doing this, that's good. But if I'm like overshooting and I'm just like abusing drugs, that's the bad part. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. So, but what I'm saying is, like, think about, like, so this is the study is rigged. Like, I know that you've reconciled it. That's fine. But what I'm saying is this shit is still lurking because when you gave me two options, right? Option number one is like, I've got ADHD and that's why I'm eating cookies.
Sure.
And option number two is I stopped eating cookies. But why does your mind generate such a judgmental hypothesis for option two?
Well, if it's because I'm just super high, then it's just because I'm abusing drugs to shortcut like the growth in character that I should have to stop.
But do you see how, like, out of the 1,000 things that you could have said, there's a differential diagnosis. There are 1,000 hypotheses why you're not eating the cookies. Which one does your mind settle on?
Well, obviously the drug, right?
Right. So that's coming from you. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, that thing is still active.
Well, but I mean, I am doing it because like that's a part of my reality, right?
Yeah, but I mean, but that's what I'm kind of saying is you're doing it and you've reconciled on an intellectual level, but that part of you that is frustrated with yourself for being weak, which, by the way, is, if I had to bet money, right? So this is the most common thing if you look at research on this. People with ADHD have harsh self-judgments. And so the way that the self-judgment manifests in your mind is by it's like a study bias. Like, the options that it generates for you are rigged. The reason, am I too high to? No, you're not too high. I mean, I don't think so. Right. So we also know, for example, that stimulant medication suppresses appetite. One of the major concerns about giving it to kids is that it can interfere with like things like growth and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which thankfully it's not too bad. But you know, there could be a neuroscientific, but I wouldn't characterize it as high. But that's what I mean is like you pick such a judgmental characterization as an option, which I think is significant.
Sure. I guess it's just because that's the thing I'm trying to avoid, because I know that taking said medication is going to improve my life in these ways. But like, if it's too much, it's probably, yeah. Does that make sense?
Right. So the things that you're anxious or worried about, right? That's that emotional energy. And that, when you say it's a brilliant insight that this is emotionally not sitting with me. And then the question is why? It's because you're emotionally in the opposite direction.
Well, like, let's say, so hypothetically, let's say let's say that I fix this. Okay, what's to prevent me from saying, okay, so like here, talk me down from this one. And I'm not saying I'm doing this, and this is all hypothetical. Sorry, I'm not asking for medication advice, but like, let's say theoretically that like I solve all these issues, I figure this out. You're like, I don't have any negative judgments whatsoever. You know, forget these things. I'm just going to do 100 milligrams of methamphetamine every day because I have no judgments about this anymore. It improves my life in all these different ways. I'm doing so better here. Like, what's the back away from the cliff there? As opposed to right now where you're saying I'm probably too far in the other direction of being too judgmental. Like, how would you, what's the balance here? Yeah.
So I would say it's just like any other medication.
Okay.
Right. So like you would have a relationship with your stimulant, the same that you do with like, let's say a cholesterol medication.
Oh, I super disagree with
or
this.
An antibiotic.
Rationalize this for me because I have a hard time figuring this one out. In my mind, I have like behavioral modifying medication that works in your brain. I separate that way differently than like insulin.
Right, but hold on a second, because what was the premise that we started with? That we dissolved this stuff, right?
Okay.
So when we dissolve that stuff, it's behavior modifying. So what? There's no emotional energy behind that. I need this medication in the same way that I need cholesterol medication. There's no judgment or attachment to it.
I feel like the difference is that like I can't do anything mentally about like my triglycerol levels or triglycerol. I can't do anything mentally about my HDL or LDL. Like I can't think these problems away. Yeah. So that the medication there is way.
You see that's your hypothetical is flawed.
Okay.
Because you're injecting your judgment into the hypothetical. Because look when I tell you, then it becomes just like any. If we don't attach any judgments to stimulants, if we've dissolved that judgment, we don't no longer judge things. Then what happens is then it's just like any other medication. That's like you follow that logically.
I mean, I follow logically what you're saying, but it feels like it doesn't. So like, for instance, I could have a day where I'm very focused and I could do everything I could do on my ADHD medication like normally, but I couldn't have a day where I don't take my insulin as a type 1 diabetic, right? That one of those worlds is possible, one of them is not. I view those things differently.
Right, but and the reason that you are, so let me give you a different example, okay? So let's say like cholesterol medication.
Sure.
Now, there are people who can get really upset about their cholesterol medication and having to take it every day. Can you imagine that?
No, I've got a family of diabetics, and sometimes they don't even take their insulin. So yeah, I'm very aware of that. I could believe that.
So like people are like, like I should be able to do this through diet.
Oh, that kind of stuff.
Like
okay,
their body image issues. This is the psychodynamics of psychopharmacology. We have all kinds of attachment to a particular pill. And what you're saying is this pill, I can understand how you would not have an attachment to, but this other pill logically has attachments for these reasons. No, bro, it's not logical, it's emotional. It's based on your attachment to that particular pill and what that pill means to you. It's not because of it's not because of the physiologic thing. That's just what your mind says, right? Because what you're worried about, and this is true of all medication, is like, this is the part of my body that's weak.
Yeah, but I feel like I feel like we don't view our brains as our bodies. I think that's like the fundamental difference here. Like if my heart isn't doing something, I take a medication for my heart. If my lungs, if my kidneys, I take a medication. But you don't view yourself as your brain. That's like you, right? I feel that's the difference. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, but I mean, when you say we, who is in that we?
Well, I was speaking we as in humans in general. I think we view ourselves as being our brain rather than like our brain as an organ in our body that we can medicate.
Do you view yourself that way?
I probably do, and yeah, as
right. So I think this is where like, as I'm telling you, man, I've worked with plenty of people who do not identify with their brain and identify with their body more.
That's really interesting.
Right?
I almost don't believe that. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But okay, that's really interesting to me. Yeah, okay.
Right? So like you can take anyone with body image issues.
Okay.
Who I am is determined. This could also be because you're a dude and I'm a dude. So like we don't get judged as harshly on average. I'm not saying that we don't get judged, and this is balancing out, right? So like it used to be that women had body image issues way more than men do. And when I work with women who have body image issues, they like, you know, a lot of who they are is tied up to their body. And working with, and that's not just one reason for that. I mean, that's evening out, by the way, I think with social media. But then there's like other things that biologically women go through that men don't have an equivalent, like pregnancy and childbirth. So when you go through pregnancy, it makes permanent alterations of your diabetes, your fat distribution. You know, the change to breast tissue is profound, right? Like when they swell and you've got all this stuff, like, I mean, so like there's definitely people can identify with the body. I think you're quite intellectual. And I think that you would be afraid, you would fear losing a chunk of your brain way more than you would fear losing a piece of your hand.
Yeah, of course.
Right? But if I'm a professional wrestler, like it could be the other way around.
Interesting.
So I think the key thing here is your attachment to it, which is the problem. That's my point. And so the problem here is that once you dissolve that attachment, the conclusion that you assume disappears, because the reason you infer that is because of your attachment to your brain over your body. I don't know if I lost you there, but
a little bit, or not you lost me a little bit, but I follow you a little bit, or I guess that would mean I did lose a little bit. You're in your world, like the brain and the body, and then like the spirit or the soul or whatever. These things exist all kind of differently from one another, and medicating your heart or medicating your liver or medicating your brain are all essentially the same thing. But I'm coming in with a normative judgment that loads brain medication differently, so all of my questions are kind of fundamentally poisoned as soon as I ask the question. Right?
Exactly, right? Because I say then it becomes just like a cholesterol medication, and what's your response? You say, no, it doesn't. And then I ask you, why is it different? And then you're like, well, because my brain is different from body. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. That is where you're inserting your judgment. Right? So if we're really presuming that you've metabolized this stuff, then it does become that. And I've seen that process many times, by the way. Right. So like when you work with the psychodynamics of psychopharmacology, people like taking their SSRI or their antidepressant medication. There's all kinds of psychotherapy that you have to do around that. What does it mean to take, I'm dependent on this medication for my fundamental happiness in life. Oh my God, I don't want to take happy pills. Like this isn't like ADHD where we know that the brain is different. Like this is just depression.
Sure.
Right. With ADHD, these people are neurodivergent. Their brain is wired differently. But me, I was fine for the first 25 years of my life, and then something happened and I became weak. Right? Even those people will say ADHD medication is okay, but depression medication isn't.
Okay.
So it all has to do with your attachment to by attachment, I'm using it in an Eastern sense, like the meaning that you associate with that thing. Okay. And what I'm hearing through and through is that you associate a lot of meaning, and you adapted beautifully and cognitively reframed beautifully, and whoever's prescribing the shit did a great job. Right? Because you're taking it, sounds like you're adherent, you're doing all this other stuff. And by the way, there's a very simple answer to your question of like, how do I know? I think you asked a question, something about
I see a lot of really positive outcomes, and I don't know, like, is this like the medication is working and now Stephen Bunnell, I'm making good choices, or am I just really high and now like I can do problem solving really?
Yeah. So that's where from like if I'm teaching a med student class, like there's a really simple answer to that. That's why we have like measurable, scientific, validated instruments.
What do you mean by that?
Right. So when so like for example, we will track symptoms.
Okay.
So how do we know if it's the medication that's working or you're making good choices? Well, first of all, you have to remember that making good choices is a complex neuroscientific process, which the medication working it helps people make good choices. That's literally what the medication does, right? It corrects whatever weaknesses or supplements whatever weaknesses there are in the brain that prevent these people from making good choices.
Sure.
Now, there's a whole complicated thing there. So some people will consider ADHD medication to be like glasses, It doesn't fix the problem, but as long as your glasses are on, your eyesight is normal. I think it's a good analogy.
Okay.
But I think there's all kinds of problems with that perspective. So, and if you look at the data on ADHD medication, there's some data that shows that the effect lingers for 3 to 6 months after you stop the medication. So there are other things going on with taking the medication.
Yeah.
That could have to do with things like developing healthy habits.
Yeah, that's what a big thing. Yeah, that I read. Yeah.
Right. So, and that's because the habits, I mean, the neurotransmitters for the habit circuitry and the location in the brain are completely different. The real tragedy in ADHD is that since you are impulsive, you never get the ability to develop habits.
Yeah.
Which is a real tragedy because the one thing that can protect you against your ADHD is the endocannabinoid system that is habits.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Other questions?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Anything else? Yeah.
I wanted to just share one or two things.
Yeah, whatever you want. Yeah.
So when people think about ADHD, like I just wanted to like share how I understand what is effective about ADHD medication, what it does and what it doesn't do.
Okay.
So if we look at ADHD medication, we have to understand that the problems that people with ADHD have come from two places.
Okay.
They come from the neurodivergence of the brain, let's just call it that, and they come from living a life with neurodivergence. So there are these social impacts that come from basically having untreated or undiagnosed ADHD. So, my favorite statistic about this is that oftentimes people won't have friends. So like kids with ADHD, by the time they hit the second grade, they stop getting invited to birthday parties. So they have difficulty socializing, because they can't function well in school, their academic achievement goes down. This is why there is a causative impact in terms of depression later in life. It also creates the things that, I kind of see with a lot of people, which is a lot of harsh self-judgment. A lot of, I should be able to do this. This medical illness is different from all the other medical illnesses. And let me give you all the logical reasons why, right? You can't directly interact with your heart. You can't directly lower your triglycerides level. By the way, you can. But that's a conversation for a different day.
When I said do it, I mean like think it down. That's what I meant. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, you can think it down.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, never mind. Okay, I believe you. Go ahead.
Okay.
Sure.
So it's wild, man.
Okay.
So and anyway, it doesn't disable your point. It's
Yeah,
just,
I understand. Yeah.
And so when we're thinking about ADHD medication, like what's the goal here? And that's where like I think we've got to understand two things. One is that even some of the trauma-induced consequences of growing up with ADHD will create ADHD symptoms.
Okay.
Impairment in concentration, difficulty focusing, difficulty with emotional regulation. If you look at the symptomatology of trauma and the symptomatology of ADHD, they overlap.
Okay.
And the real problem that we see with ADHD is when you grow up with ADHD and you get traumatized because you recognize you're just as smart as everyone else, but you can't f***ing do it. It's so easy. They're just sitting there and looking at a book and reading it. That's literally what reading is. It's just looking at a book. You can sit there and look at a book, but you can't read the words. And so you feel incompetent. And as you grow up with that ADHD, you start to experience various micro traumas or even macroscopic traumas. Parents getting mad at you. Why are you like this? Like, you just need to study. You need to try harder. I used to get called into my, teacher's office once a semester for my parent-teacher conference, and they'd say, if he just applied himself, he'd do so well. He's got so much potential. And so that kind of stuff creates its own kind of trauma-induced cognitive deficits. And then if we look at treatment of ADHD, stimulants can correct the neurodivergence, but all that other stuff is not going to get corrected with a stimulant. And some of those things, some of the other consequences that happen when we grow up with ADHD is we fail to develop adaptations. So we get worse at developing like emotional regulation techniques and things like that. And the adaptations that we do develop growing up as a neurodivergent kid in a neurotypical world become maladaptations later in life.
Okay.
We're also more vulnerable to things like addictions and stuff like that. So when we look at stimulant medication, a lot of it doesn't get fixed, which confuses a lot of people. A lot of it does. If we look at stimulant medication, most of the research of the meta-analyses suggests that starting it early to prevent all of these psychological impacts will be protective in the long run and lead to better outcomes in terms of lifelong achievement, academic success, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Because this what you got to understand is you can have ADHD with certain cognitive deficits, and untreated ADHD plus cognitive deficits plus failing out of school. What does that do to someone's psychological trajectory, their life trajectory? There's recently a study that showed that the majority of reasons that people are depressed today have nothing to do with like internal feelings or their relationships. They have everything to do with circumstances in their life. Lack of financial stability, living at home, whatever, other kinds of things. Their life objectively sucks. And so when we're thinking about ADHD medication and whether to do it or not do it, I think this is what you really need to think about, is that it's not going to fix everything, but it'll prevent a lot of damage, which is usually why we will medicate kids with ADHD if we choose to. And that even if you start medication as an adult, it's not going to fix everything, because there are the consequences of growing up with ADHD that need to be addressed. The last thing to consider is that the effect size of ADHD medication is basically the same or slightly inferior to psychotherapy. And this kind of circles back to like, can I do it without medication? The answer is probably yes, but it takes a concerted effort, which a lot of people don't have the bandwidth for. And there's also data that shows that medicating someone with ADHD makes the effect of psychotherapy better. So when you have someone who can pay attention in psychotherapy, they get a greater effect size. The other cool thing is that the effect of psychotherapy lingers for years after the completion of treatment compared to months for ADHD medication. So this is kind of all a roundabout way of saying, you know, I still think that what you got to do what's right for you, and everyone's got to do what's right for them. I think that there's a lot of very real shame and judgment that kids with ADHD develop and then carry into adulthood. And that if you really want to conquer this problem, I think it's usually like a combination of like all the above. So medication, if that's what works for you, psychotherapy, if you have the time and energy for it. And just as a prescriber myself, the primary reason I prescribe medication is when people don't have time to do everything else. That's really, because I think there are very few cases where, at least in psychiatry, we really need medication. Like in most cases, psychotherapy is just as effective as whatever we're prescribing.
Okay.
So I think those are just a couple of considerations.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun to chat. Yeah.
Likewise. And good luck with all of your endeavors. And yeah, I really encourage you to continue exploring down. I'm sure you will. But really, like, trying to get to the root of this stuff, and I'm so curious about your personal take on spirituality and stuff like that, because I think you're primed for it.
Yeah.
More so now. Yeah.
More so now than before is absolutely true, but that might be from like 1 to 6 out of 100, but maybe, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. More primed than before. Are you just curious? Are you going to TwitchCon, or do you not say that publicly?
No, I'm not going to TwitchCon.
Oh, okay. Well, never mind.
Are you going to TwitchCon?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not going this year. I've got other stuff. I'm doing I think one thing. It's next week, right?
The 20th to the 22nd, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually going on a spiritual retreat.
Oh, well, good for you.
During that time.
So much better than the rest of us. Wow. I'll be enjoying my vanity in Vegas. No, you're good. Okay. Well, that's cool. Well, good for you. Yeah. Wait, when you do those, do you normally do those with do you take any family members with you, or is it you or your wife, or is that like always like a just you thing?
This time I'm going alone, and this is the first time that I've gone in 12 years.
Wow. How long is the retreat for?
So 5 days.
Cool.
So it's been, thankfully I got enough to, I mean, I have a spiritual practice that's pretty set. Mm-hmm. Always interested in learning more, but It's just with medical training and streaming and all that kind of stuff, like that kind of took a step on the back burner, and now I've got enough time to do that kind of thing.
When you do your spirituality stuff, do you ever maintain contact with the people that you felt like helped you in your early 20s, the guys that you said you went over and studied with, or are you kind of like not talking to those people anymore?
I'm not talking to those people anymore. For the most part. It's interesting. So I think the person who's the closest to what I would describe as a guru, I basically only had contact with them for 2 years. And for a while, it was very hurtful because it kind of felt like they ghosted me, and I don't know what happened. But
gotcha.
You know, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Cool.
Well, yeah. Hey, I appreciate the talk. Do you want to? Yeah. I say shout yourself out. I think most of my audience knows who you are, but yeah, where can they find you if they're looking for more cool stuff or projects you're working on, or if you could direct people to one link or one thing, where would you send people? Yeah. Yeah.
So I think since we're talking about ADHD, we have. So like part of what we built at HG, we build different kinds of resources and stuff. We've got a ton of videos that I think are pretty good on YouTube about ADHD, but we also have like a guide where I go through kind of like in a more comprehensive way, like practices, meditation techniques and things like that to specifically understand the different parts of ADHD and how to really overcome them. So they can check out Dr. K's guide, and then I stream on YouTube and Twitch. And yeah, check us out at Healthy Gamer GG. And awesome. Likewise, where can we find you, Steven?
Destiny. Yeah, on YouTube, Kick, maybe Twitch again someday, and Instagram. So yeah, thanks a lot.
And then is there anything that you're going to be doing coming up that we should tune into? Anything that you're excited about in terms of podcasts or collabs or debating anyone cool?
My most exciting thing is finally, I think it's the 20th or the 21st next month, I finally do my Ben Shapiro debate. That should be fun.
Oh wow, that's awesome, man.
Yeah. Yep.
That's I'd love to do that. You said 20th of next month, so November?
Either the 20th or the 21st, yeah. That should be fun. Yeah.
Where is that going to be? Do you know where we can is it, I assume it's going to be live.
I have no idea yet. I think Lex Friedman wants to do it in a studio, so it might be like all pre-recorded. We might do it live. I'm not sure yet, so yeah, still ironing out the details.
All right, so I'm just trying to figure out where I find a watch party.
Yeah. It'll make the rounds, I'm sure. So, yeah.
All right, cool, man. Yeah. Well, good luck to you on your debate. I look forward to it. And thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for chatting.
Take care, man.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.